Hello, everyone. I'm Bennett Grubbs, the Associate Director of Teaching and Professional Development Programs at the American Political Science Association. Thank you for joining us for this grant writing with Russell Sage Foundation, Best Practices for Crafting a Successful Application. This is just one of many virtual professional development programs that we run. And this event is being recorded and will be made available on AppsInNet's webinar archive page. I'll send the link to everyone who has registered and attended this event. Without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our two representatives from the Russell Sage Foundation, Stephen Glauser and James Wilson.
Hi, everyone. I'm Stephen Glauser. I'm a senior program officer at the foundation. I'm primarily responsible for our early career programs. That includes our pipeline grants competition for assistant professors and our dissertation research grants for basically all ABD doctoral students.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is James Wilson. I am program director here at the foundation, where I've been for 16 years. I oversee our programs in social, political, and economic inequality, and I also coordinate our visiting scholars program.
Great. So I'm going to turn off my video for the presentation, but I'll pop back up for the Q&A afterwards. Please, throughout the webinar, feel free to submit questions through the Q&A function in Zoom. Yeah, we can go ahead and get started. So first, a little bit of a history on the foundation. We were founded in 1907 by Margaret Olivia Sage, the husband or the wife of Russell Sage. The main thing that's relevant here is that we were founded for the improvement of social and living conditions in the United States. And that generally means that most of the research, all of the research we fund has to be either take place in the US or be relevant to the US in some fashion. We can talk more about that a little bit later. The foundation has gone through two pretty distinct periods in its history. The early period, it was much more a direct services philanthropy, funding institutional support on things like poverty reduction, urban planning, housing, public health, all of these sorts of things. I think institutional legend goes that we did not invest wisely in the Great Depression. And so we found out that after your endowment has taken a hit, it's a lot cheaper to invest in social science research than it is to invest in the actual institutional supports. So since in the post-war period, we've primarily been focused on the social sciences, and that includes strengthening the methods, data, theory of the social sciences as a way to sort of fulfill that improvement of social and living conditions in the United States. There's a few different ways to work with us. So the things that we support, we have research grants, and these include our presidential or trustee level research grants. These are larger awards, up to $200,000 for about 2 years. We have our pipeline grants program for assistant professors that I mentioned earlier. Those are smaller, $35,000 to $50,000 awards for 1 year, just for assistant professors. And then we have our dissertation research grants for ABD doctoral students, and those can be up to $15,000. We have a couple of different kinds of fellowships. So these are residential fellowships. You come to the Russell Sage Foundation offices in New York City. We have subsidized apartments down the street. The Visiting Scholars Program is primarily designed for folks who are on sabbatical and who basically take the entire year to work on a series of articles or a book or something like that. Visiting researchers are shorter term stays, like if you just really want to finish up a project and you just need some space or time to do that work. We also have a publications department. We're not going to talk as much about that. We're going to talk more about the grants, but we do publish books, and we have an open access journal that we make freely available. We also support political scientists. This is just a short and not complete list of political scientists who've gotten funding, who've been visiting scholars in the past couple of years. But in reality, what it is we fund this discipline. We fund across the various social sciences. But yes, this is the work that you do as political science is relevant to us as a foundation. Our main program areas are here on the left. These are are like long-term core program areas. First is behavioral science and decision making and context. This really grew out of the foundation's historical involvement in the creation of the field of behavioral economics. And we sort of wanted to show that we are seeing the expansion of the work in behavioral science across the different disciplines, not just in economics and psychology. So that's a broader sort of a program area. We have a long-standing program on the future of work that we've had since, I think, 1994. And that sort of looks at anything to do with the labor market. It's looking at the effects of technology on the labor market. So things like AI and automation, but it's also looking at things like worker power and unionization. It's looking at other things like the increase of the minimum wage and what does that mean for employment and things like that. All of those sorts of questions fall under our Future of Work program. We have a race, ethnicity, and immigration program that grew out of the two pre-existing programs that have been the foundation long supported. One was on cultural contact and one was on just immigration. But we're looking at anything from how like immigrants are integrated into the US society to the various differences that can happen, different treatment that can happen via various programs or policies by race or ethnicity and things like that. And then finally, we have an inequality program that used to just be called social inequality, but is again to show the sorts of breadth of the types of disciplines and topics we're interested in is now called the social, political, and economic inequality program. All four of these programs have RFPs or requests for proposals on our website that basically are example research questions by various topics. These RFPs and example research questions are not exhaustive. It's important to note that we are not only interested in the questions that we list, they are meant to be representative of the types of questions that we are interested in. So I highly recommend that you go through, look at those RFPs, see the types of research topics and research questions that we're interested in, and then you can sort of see if the type of work that you do is of interest to the foundation. It's also worth mentioning that you can always look up previous grantees for each of these programs. So you can see if the folks you are citing are getting support from the foundation. It's maybe possible that we would also be interested in the work that you're doing. On the right here, we have some special initiatives. These are sort of like JV program areas. They're maybe more short term or a way that we want to drive some funding towards some specific topics. So the first one is on immigration and immigrant integration. This obviously slots right under our race, ethnicity, and immigration program, but we are particularly interested in the integration of immigrants into our society. This initiative is co-funded with the Carnegie Corporation of New York. So we have a pot of money just for questions that are looking at this. And then I'm going to take a deep breath on the next one. We have an initiative on promoting educational attainment and economic mobility among racially, ethnically, and economically diverse groups after the 2023 Supreme Court decision to ban race-conscious college admission policies. And it is co-funded with the Hewlett Foundation, the Spencer Foundation, and the W.T. Grant Foundation. And when you have that many foundations collaborating, you get a long-winded title like that because no one can agree on what it can be called. You can essentially be referred to it as like they ended affirmative action, now what initiative. But I'll refer to it as race conscious admissions initiative or the affirmative action initiative because I can't be bothered to say that entire title every time. One thing I do want to note just before I go to the next slide is that a lot of projects come in at the intersection of two of these programs. And so if you as an investigator are unsure of which program you should fit in, I don't want you to worry too much about that. We are not so siloed that if someone submits something to say the inequality program and we think it would be a better fit at the race, ethnicity, immigration program, that's okay. We don't reject it. We just move it over to the race, ethnicity, and immigration program. We're happy to take questions later or via email about if you send us an abstract or some information about your project, we can tell you which program it maybe fits better in. But in reality, a lot of work happens at the intersection of these topics, and it's okay if you're not sure which one it fits into. There's a couple things that we sort of to just try to maximize our impact or not step on the toes of other larger funders. So as I mentioned earlier, we fund things focused in the US. We are particularly interested on analyses of newly available data or novel use of existing data. We're interested in original data collection. This includes all sorts. It can be field experiments, in-depth qualitative interviews, ethnographies, etc. All of those things are of interest. We do not fund, or we fund fewer projects looking at health or mental health outcomes. This is one of those things, like there's places like NIH and the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation that really focus on health outcomes. I will say that there's on occasion where the health outcome is maybe on the other side of the equation, where like like access to insurance leads to worse economic outcomes or something like that. But so you can imagine work that is in the health space that we could still be interested in at the foundation. But again, this is something that if you're unsure if it's a fit, I would really recommend that you email us ahead of any deadline and ask if a program staff thought it would be a fit. We're interested in some educational outcomes. We tend to be interested in educational outcomes that are looking at educational attainment, sort of like the closer that folks get to the job market or to the labor market. So we're talking about like college persistence or something like that. We're less interested in the getting in the weeds of educational processes. We're less interested in teacher outcomes. We're less interested in things like curricular development. But again, figuring out where that line is not necessarily easy. So if you have a question about whether your project is a fit, I would recommend reaching out to us in the future. And then finally, we generally don't fund routine analyses of existing publicly available data. So if you were just downloading the GSS, the PSID, the ACS, the CPS, and running regressions on it, that's not super of interest to us. But if you are using one of those data sets, restricted data part, like something that's restricted, that could be more of interest. Or if you're combining that data set with another data set, that could still be interesting. And that would fall under the second bullet on the left about an analysis of or a novel use of existing data. Finally, I just want to note at the bottom, we do not restrict funding based on the citizenship of the investigator. Again, we just want the research to be US focused. And the only restriction we have based on institution is that for our dissertation research grants program, you have to be at a US-based institution. For all of our other funding, you can be at international institutions, and that's okay. And then note the asterisk there that if you are the earlier you are in your career, the more willing we are to take a look at proposals that are doing more routine analyses of existing publicly available data, largely because we understand that early career researchers may not have the money to actually purchase other data sets or something like that, so they are more limited to those publicly available data sets. For our larger research grants, these are our trustee and presidential grants for so everyone has to be, it's primarily targeted towards faculty who have their PhD. We have 2 deadlines coming up. We have one this October where you will be, if you are eventually funded, it will be at our June 2025 board meeting. And we are accepting proposals in the programs of our social, political, and economic inequality program, our future of work program, and that very long-winded affirmative action initiative. At our March LOI deadline, we are accepting proposals for our behavioral science and decision-making and context program, our race, ethnicity, and immigration program, and that special initiative on immigration and immigrant integration. More on how that process works. You have to have a PhD. These are up to 2-year grants. The difference between presidential and trustee grants is just the dollar amount. If you are asking for anything below $75,000, we do not pay indirects on that to your university, and we call that a presidential grant. If you are asking for more than $75,000, we call that a trustee grant because it goes to our full board of trustees for approval, whereas the presidential grants go to our president for approval. But all of these go through the same process that we will describe, that I'll describe in a little bit, going through the peer review process. It's everything else is treated the same. It's just like who gets the final decision on it is what's different. This is a 2-step application. You submit a short 4-page LOI that goes through review. If it is reviewed well, we invite a proposal. We generally have 3 deadlines a year. The next 2, as I mentioned, are in October 29th and March 11th. The program area, pay attention to which program areas are being accepted at which deadline. Funds can be used for all sorts of research costs. It can be used for summer salary for the PIs. It can be used for research assistance, data collection, participant incentives, all sorts of the things you need to actually do the research. This is what the process looks like. If you submit your LOI, you first go through an internal staff review. You can imagine that we get a lot of proposals and LOIs across a lot of different topics, a lot of different disciplines, a lot of different research methodologies using a lot of different types of data. So we as a program staff are generalists. You can think of us as maybe like editors at a journal where we are reading these, we are skimming these, I should say, and we are trying to decide which ones should go out to external review, and then we are helping pick who those external peer reviewers are. So if you make it through that desk reject stage, you go to the external peer review, and then we are pretty much beholden to those external peer reviewers based on their recommendation. If they recommend that we invite a full proposal, then we generally do that. That full proposal can be up to 20 double-spaced pages as opposed to the 4-page LOI. And then all full proposals that come in go out to external peer review. We then ask folks to submit response memos to those reviewer concerns and reviewer comments. This is not an R&R. This is not something where you have to go back and update the proposal itself. This is just a response memo to the comments. And then all of those, that entire package, the proposal, the reviews, the responses, go to our advisory committee, and they help us make the decisions about which ones should go forward for funding. So for early career grants, the things that we have are our pipeline grants competition and our dissertation research grants for ABD doctoral students. On the left, I'll talk about the pipeline grants. That has a deadline later this month on October 22nd. To be eligible for this, you have to be an assistant professor or a lecturer with a PhD after stints within the past 10 years. And you can't ever have received an RSF research grant or fellowship before. If you as faculty, if you received a dissertation grant, you are still eligible for the pipeline grant. These grants are 1-year grants. They are $35K for individuals or $50K for teams of eligible investigators. You do not need to submit a budget at the time of application. It is unlike the previous process that was an LOI and then a full proposal. This is just a one-step submission. You submit a 7-page proposal with your CV. The funds, again, can be used for all sorts of research costs, summer salary, data purchase, data collections, research assistance, course buyouts, conference travel, etc. We try to pair grantees with a mentor who works in the same field as them. And then there's also a capstone conference where grantees present their work to each other and give feedback. On the right, we have the dissertation research grants. That deadline is going to be in February 2025. And you can get funding by, I think, either July or August. I should mention for the pipeline grants, the funding is usually available by June or July after we've gone through the entire process. Any PhD students who are enrolled at a US-based institution are eligible. And these are 1-year grants of up to $15,000. This is, again, a 1-step application process. It is 5 pages, single-space proposal, with the CV, no budget at the time of application, and funds are allowed for all things like participant fees, data collection, transcription, lab fees, etc. But what's nice here is that up to half of this grant can be used for a stipend. We understand that folks have to pay rent and buy books and things like that. Just quickly, these are the fellowship programs that I mentioned earlier. The Visiting Scholars Program is primarily designed for folks who are 3 years post-PhD. It's a 1-step process, a 5-page proposal and your CV. It's for either a half-year or full-year in-residence fellowship here in New York. The next deadline is June 25th, 2025, but note that that is for residency in the 2026-2027 academic year. Whereas for the visiting researcher, we make those decisions later. You'll see that the deadline for the visiting researchers are this May 2025 for the 2025-2026 academic year. The visiting scholars comes with a we will pay up to, I think, 50% because we're assuming that the university will cover it if you have a sabbatical. The visiting researchers, we don't pay any salary. That's just you get office space and things like that. The review process for these that we just went over, both the pipeline, the DRG, and the fellowship review, because they are just a one-step program. These are a one-step process. You submit at the deadline. Everything goes through that same internal staff desk reject review. If you make it to the external peer review, we are, again, pretty beholden to that. We will occasionally ask for responses to those reviewer comments, and it'll be reviewed by either the advisory committee for the pipeline grants and the dissertation research grants, or the visiting scholar committee for the visiting scholar fellowships. I do want to talk about the reviewers at the various stages. So again, as I mentioned, RSF program staff are doing that internal screen. We are generalists, as I mentioned, so we are primarily assessing for the fit of the proposal with RSF programs priorities and various submission guidelines. We're also assessing for like timing, like is this too preliminary? Have they done a proof of concept? Have they done a pilot study? Have they already done the lit review? Do they have a well-developed research design? Those are the types of questions we're thinking of internally, and we're sort of writing in the margins folks we think would be good external peer reviewers based on either topic or methodology or knowledge of the data, et cetera. Those external reviewers, I think it's a big thing to note that they can be interdisciplinary. So it's a good idea to cite widely and know the state of the literature outside of your specific, outside of political science. These folks are chosen specifically for their knowledge of the topic or methodology. So if you are doing a survey experiment, it may be that we have a sociologist who also does survey experiments look at that proposal, or something like that. So it's just good to know that because we are an interdisciplinary funder, it is possible that the folks looking at your proposal may be from a different discipline, and it's a good idea to know the state of the literature on the topic a little bit outside of your discipline. As you saw in previous slides, a lot of these proposals go to our advisory committees before they make it to the next stage to decide funding. Those advisory committees are standing committees for each program area. They are also interdisciplinary. They are senior, more senior, still active researchers who are recruited for each program area and their expertise in each topic. They really decide which proposals move forward for funding consideration. And then finally, the Board of Trustees serves as the final decision maker on all proposals over $75,000. You can see who they are on our website, but they are, again, still active academics who are very much involved in the research area, their research areas, and in the topics that they care about. We've talked about the desk reject stage at a couple points here, and that really is the biggest hurdle to get over. We desk reject over 50% of applicants, and in some stages, again, purely denominator based because we are a open call funder. We do not solicit specific proposals. We accept proposals as they come in. So at certain deadlines, when we get inundated with a lot of proposals, that desk reject rate might go up. But the main reasons that we reject things without review is that if it's not a priority of the foundation. So that could be that it's not focused on the US, or it's focused on outcomes that are not a priority, like those health outcomes that I mentioned earlier. It could be that routine analyses of existing publicly available data. It could be just something way out of left field that we don't support, like operational support, animal studies, et cetera. The next big reason that it's too preliminary. You need to show us that you have access to the data or a well-developed analytic plan, a plan to get the data, a plan to go collect the data that's well thought out, a proof of concept, anything you have with pilot data that can show us that you're ready to go when the grant gets made, versus if the grant gets made, then you would start doing those things. That would not be as strong of a proposal. And then finally, we get a lot of proposals that are clearly the result of procrastination or something like that. People are just hastily writing these things. They are maybe copying and pasting from their submissions to NSF or other funders. I think you should note that there are a lot of things that like other funders require in their proposals that we don't. Like we don't necessarily require a large section on your budget for any of those preliminary like LOIs or other program proposals. We don't need a lot of information on why you're qualified to do the research you're proposing. We don't need a whole section on that because we're going to look at your CV to determine that. We basically, this bottom line is that we prioritize research projects that have a strong descriptive or causal design. We just want a strong design that closely matches the research question being posed. If you do make it past that external screen, these are the 5 questions we ask our reviewers at the full proposal stage. The folks, at the LOI stage, they don't get these questions, but this is essentially the vibe that we're asking for. We want to know if the questions are important and compelling. We want to know if the design, data, and methods are appropriate to answer that question. We want to know if the PI can do this or if they need additional help or an additional consultant or an additional PI. And then we want to know what the contribution is. Is this going to be an interesting paper in a top journal? Is this a significant advancement? Is this a necessary smaller advancement? Is sometimes the data itself is really cool if the researcher is going to make it public. That's also an important contribution. And then we also ask reviewers to sort of add any other things that they want to help strengthen or improve the project. I do want to note that this is a concern that's come up a few times more recently. We do not allow our reviewers to upload any of the content that they are downloading into AI tools such as ChatGPT for various privacy concerns or things like that. We are not at the point where we are using AI for peer review yet at the foundation. And then finally, this is just some things that I've probably said already in this presentation, but I really want you to make sure that the project is a fit for the foundation. If you're unsure, it's always a good idea to just send us a note. I'll put up our email address on the next page and send us an abstract or a short write-up of the proposal you're thinking of putting together, and we'll be able to tell you whether we think it's a good fit or not. We want you to focus on the research questions to drive the proposal. What we really don't want are like, hey, I have this cool data set and I'm going to ask some questions of it. We don't want it to be sort of open-ended in like a fishing expedition. You should really think about balancing the proposal narrative. Make sure you don't. I think we get a lot of proposals where they spend, if you only have 4 pages on an LOI and you spend the first 3 pages on your lit review and telling us why it's an important question, you don't have enough space to tell us what you're actually doing. You should really consider spending about 50% of a proposal to us on the research design because we do want to see what you're doing. If you are asked to respond to the reviewers, take them seriously. It's okay to disagree with reviewers. I say this to a lot of early career folks in particular, is that what I don't want to happen is that your project turns into this Frankenstein's monster because reviewer set 1 said do this, reviewer 2 said do this, reviewer 3 said do this. So you cobble all of that together and try to adjust to make it something that the peer reviewers wanted. And then you turn into this terrible project that is now too big or too unwieldy. It's okay to disagree with the reviewers. It's okay to remind the reviewers of the scope of the project. But if you are going to disagree with them, do it respectfully. And I would say bring the receipts, bring the citations that show why the decisions you're making are the right decisions. Show your work. And oftentimes you can do that in the proposal itself so that they don't even bring up those questions that you would then have to respond to in a memo. If you show the various strengths and weaknesses and the decision-making process behind the choices that you made, that often really helps show that you have a deep understanding of this topic that you want to do the research on. Again, and then next bullet, don't overpromise or exaggerate what the contribution of the project will be. It's often a good idea to involve your Office of Sponsored Projects because they know a lot of tricks about budgets. They know a lot of things about like, oh, you should really do a pilot before you submit or something like that. They can often be a really, really good asset. And then I'll also mention here at the bottom, we have some example LOIs and proposals for our various programs on our website. These are real proposals from real successful applications that got funding. You should go through and look at those. We have some from various disciplines, methods, etc. All of those can be very helpful for people. And then finally, I've said it a few times, please use this as a resource. Please email us. We're here to answer your questions. Hopefully we're not that intimidating. We're happy to answer your questions. And with that, I'll put up our email address here. You can email us at programs@rsage.org. That goes to multiple people. So if someone's out on vacation, someone can always answer that email. I encourage you to sign up for our mailing list. If you go to our website, there's a little thing at the top that says join our mailing list. But other than that, I'm happy to start taking questions.
Hello, thank you for that, Stephen. So far we have sort of two groups of questions. I'll start with the first one on eligibility. We had a question from someone that was asking if the dissertation grants are the only funding available to ABDs, and are ABDs able to apply if they are in their final year of study? And then the second question, I believe, is referencing the pipeline grants, and it is asking if people in postdocs are eligible to apply for that.
Sure. So for the dissertation grants, essentially what we want is that the research project that you're proposing to us ends up being the project that is at least a part of your dissertation. So that generally means ABD. It generally means like your proposal has been approved by your committee and things like that. That can happen at different stages at different institutions, and it varies by discipline as well. But essentially, you can maybe even apply, but before we release the funds, we actually need confirmation from your advisor that this is the approved project for your dissertation. And the second one was on postdocs. Unfortunately, currently postdocs are not eligible for the pipeline grants unless they have a faculty appointment starting when the grant. So if you are currently a postdoc, but you have a faculty appointment starting this summer, you could apply this fall. But we don't have funding just for postdocs right now.
Thank you. Please feel free to keep the questions coming in the Q&A. The other two questions are sort of related to methods and data collection. Someone asked, does Russell Sage fund the development of new or original sort of survey data? And the second question is Russell Sage interested in historical and qualitative data and methods collections?
Sure. Yeah. So first, yeah, we fund original surveys all the time. Generally, we like to see that they've been pre-tested at least a little bit before we fund them. So we want to see a small pilot that can, again, depending on the nature of the survey being proposed, that can be something that was piloted on something like Mechanical Turk or something like that. But we want to see a small pilot to show that just the questions have been sort of, I don't know, vetted in some fashion. But yes, we do fund original surveys all the time. Well, I don't want to say all the time, but it happens. And the second question was on historical and qualitative work. So the answer is yes and yes. The qualitative methods that we see most often is probably in-depth interviews for various things, but also ethnographies. We've also seen some more historical qualitative work where they have archives or something like that. The historical work that we fund tends to be historians using social science sort of methods, or historians using historical data to say something about a trend or something like that. But it is not necessarily, just because you're using historical data does not mean we're not interested in it, particularly if you're looking at something that is still relevant today or something like that.
Thank you. We have, it looks like two more questions focused on eligibility. It seems like, and they linked to this in the Q&A if you want to look at it, but it says in rare circumstances, and they're quoting from your guys' website, RSF may consider applicants from scholars who do not hold a doctorate but can demonstrate a strong career background that establishes their ability to conduct high-level peer-reviewed scholarly research. They just want to know if that rule still applies, and then they link to where it looks like that is your all statement. And then the second question, again, it seems like it's focusing on the pipeline program. They're wondering, someone asked, is the pipeline program narrower in their eligibility than other programs? The webpage mentions economic mobility and access to opportunity. Should applicants emphasize these topics? I guess they're thinking like, are you interested in your sort of funding priorities around this?
Sure. So yes, we still would consider work from a scholar who has demonstrated like through their career to be able to do high level research. That's sort of on a case by case basis. So that's something I would probably recommend. You maybe send us an email with your CV or sort of something like that before you end up going through the process, just to make sure that you can confirm that eligibility. And on the second one, actually the pipeline program, I would argue, is topically wider than a lot of our other ones. We have a specific RFP for our pipeline grants that has like sort of like research questions and topics that we're interested in broadly. But in reality, the pipeline grants program, we're interested in almost anything across the other sort of 4 main program areas of the foundation. It's sort of a catch-all. If it's something that would be of interest to our inequality program, we're still interested in it in our pipeline program. If it's something in our race, ethnicity, immigration program, we're likely still very interested in our pipeline program. And it's sort of one of those things where, because it's an earlier career group, like assistant professors, we're sort of being like, we're willing to be a little bit more, I think, reactive to the field. It's like, oh, here's what young scholars are interested in studying. Maybe we should think about moving in that direction, or like dabbling our toes into it or something like that. So I encourage folks to read the RFP. But again, I do want to really emphasize that those RFPs are examples. They are not exhaustive. We are not limited to those research questions or those research topics.
Thank you. We have another question focused on sort of the dissertation grant eligibility. They ask, would a dissertation whose data collection has started, but has some methods that may start later, would they still be able to apply? And then they sort of give an example of using ethnographic methods, observation or interviews that has started, but maybe the field experiment using a focus group will be done later.
Yeah, and I'll actually broaden that to other, not just the dissertation grants. That can also be larger projects where if you've sort of done this piece, but there's still a lot more work to be done. I think our concern would be, oh, have you done so much work that this project is basically done yet? And if the answer is no, if there is something where our funding can make the difference, and our funding can be like, that can be anything from like add a qualitative component to another study, or like this question asker said, like if you are you've already started the qualitative portion, but you want to do a field experiment or something else later. Like, yes, like as long as you describe in the proposal like what work has already been done and what work remains to be done, and that's clear in the proposal, then we're still very open to it. And sorry, I guess the other caveat, as long as the budget request makes sense, right? Like the budget isn't like you're not asking for us to fund the entire project when you've already done half the project. The budget makes sense for the work that is remaining, then that would be perfectly allowable.
Thank you. We have another question that sort of shifts topics, that just wants to know maybe some background on how you recruit and select reviewers for your grants.
Sure. Yeah. So it's a mix. So we rely pretty heavily on former grantees, former visiting scholars, sort of folks that know us. Part of that is because maybe they feel like they owe us because they were given some funding and they're more likely to say yes as reviewers. So that could be part of it. But we are also regularly cold emailing folks who work in a topic area, or things like that, because it may be some place that we don't have a whole roster of reviewers within our Rolodex currently. We also ask applicants to list potential reviewers in their when you apply, and that's something that I don't think enough people take advantage of. We use those suggested reviewers all the time. Reviewer burden is a real thing between proposal and funding reviews and journal reviews that people are doing. We can't go back to the well too many times, so we really try to expand our reviewer pool regularly. Sometimes that's us looking at the citations of the proposal that was proposed to us. So who you cite also can lead us to potential reviewers. But I really would encourage folks, especially if you know these fields because you're in these subfields and these topics, if you think a person would be a good reviewer and they won't have a conflict of interest, like they are not in your department or they haven't co-published with you recently, then please list them, because we are always trying to expand our reviewer pool.
Thank you. I certainly understand from talking to other apps that program directors sort of the struggle to get reviewers. Another question is, would an international student doing PhD in a US-based university be eligible for the dissertation grant? Similarly, if there is a faculty working in an international university currently on sabbatical, but they are physically present in the US and the project is also US-based, are they eligible for early research grant application?
Sure. So the first one's easy. The answer is yes. If you're a dissertation student, if you're a PhD student at a US institution, you're eligible. If your project is of interest to the foundation or not that would depend on what the project is. But like if it's a US based project and it sounds like it fits within one of our program areas, you're certainly eligible to apply. The second question is on international scholars who are currently at a U.S. institution. In reality, for our pipeline grants and our larger research grants, we fund internationally and international scholars at domestic universities. So it really doesn't. What we're primarily looking for is that the work, the research question, the project is actually focused on the US. We don't care as much where what institution the research is happening at, or where the PI is from or anything like that. I'll just reiterate just in case, the only one that we do limit it is for the dissertation grants. You have to be at a US institution. And that's primarily for the ease of distribution of funds.
Thank you. We still have time for a few more questions if anyone wants to submit any. We have one that asks, are general professionals who are non-RSF affiliated eligible for RSF reviewer application? Thanks.
I'm not sure. Maybe the question asker can clarify. I'm not sure what they mean by reviewer application. That we do occasionally use folks who are not affiliated with us to be reviewers, and they are. We also, while most of our funding and most of our reviewer pool are active academics, we also use folks from think tanks and other research institutes. People at government agencies also review for us. So I think it's one of those things where if you're sort of an expert in the space, either on a topic or methodology, or you really have intricate knowledge of the data, we're happy to use you as a reviewer, regardless of your professional, like what professional capacity you do that in.
Thank you. We have two, and we have a comment just saying that this has been very helpful, and thanks. So just wanted to share that. I would just point for the question asking for where to contact, it's still on the screen. We have programs@russellsage.org is the best place to reach out for sort of questions to find out if your application is a good fit.
Yeah, and if anyone's going to do that, I would just say, please, like, just send us like a little abstract or some idea of what the program, what your project is about. And I guess I should have said this earlier, but like the farther ahead of a deadline you are, the more chance we have to actually connect with you. Like I can often, if we're a month ahead of a deadline, I can even offer, if it's, I think, a strong contender, I can set up a Zoom call and talk with you one-on-one. I think we all are aware of academics' tendency to procrastinate. I will say that we have a lot of data over a lot of years that almost probably a vast majority of applications come in basically on deadline day, and a vast majority of questions come in like the week prior to a deadline. So just get your questions in early, and then we can actually have a lot of time to dedicate to you. If you get your question in the day before the deadline, we'll try to get to it, but the quality of our response is going to be much to be desired.
Understand that. We have one additional question that sort of just asks if you had any thing to share that distinguishes an excellent application from a good one.
I think the number of times where there's a couple things that I see happen. The number of times where we read applications where I have to like look for the questions they're asking, and like it's okay for you to like put your research questions in bold. Like I think it's a good thing for you to remember that we as staff, when we're doing that initial screen, we're reading through piles of these. So like anything you can do to make it easier for us is great. So like bolding things, highlighting like this is my research question, this is my hypothesis, these are my data sources, things like that. That's a really helpful thing. It's something that like a good application may not do that and still get funded. That's fine. But I think the ones that are really, maybe I'm biased here, the ones that make life easier for us as program staff, those like that doesn't hurt, right? Like it doesn't hurt to make life easier for the people who are making the decisions for you. And then I would also say, like, use the space that you're given. I think a lot of folks sort of are like, I got 3 pages, that's good enough. Like, no, like there's always more details that are left on the cutting room floor. If you don't have the stuff, if you aren't cutting things, then it's maybe a good sign that your project's probably too preliminary because you don't have the research design fully fleshed out yet. But yeah, so I think the last, like on that, like the more you give us on the research design, the data, the methods, those details, the better, because all of that gives us the confidence that you've really done the work, the pre-work to be at a level where we could consider funding.
For that, we just received an additional question that sort of asks, if the project proposal includes funding for multiple original surveys, but one survey is already completed as proof of concept, would you all like to see a pilot for the other proposed surveys, or would the first survey be sufficient to be considered as a proof of project for the whole overall?
I think that's a sort of, it depends. So we get these occasionally where it can be a survey leading to other surveys. There can also be projects that have like a qualitative focus group that maybe leads to the development of the survey, or vice versa, where a survey leads to a qualitative subsample. So you're not sure what your interview guide is going to look like yet. So where these like second part of the project is based on the first part of the project, I would default to like the more details you can give us, the better. If there's some way for you to have piloted the later surveys, that would be good to show. If that's not possible because you need the findings from the first one before you do the later ones, then just explain that. Like, so we understand that sometimes like step 1 has to happen before step 2. But occasionally it has been the case before where if they're both really big sections and section 2 or part 2 relies on part 1, sometimes we split those into 2 proposals and we say, hey, we'll fund part 1, then after go do that, come back to us when you have those findings, and then we can consider funding part 2. So it's happened. I've seen it happen both ways. But the more details and sort of the background about why this is the correct way that you should go about answering the question you're posing, the more information we have on that, the better.
One more question came in, and this sort of asks, would a research protocol be part of the application. And I think more generally, you can think of this as if you are adding an exhibit or an annex to your proposal, does that count towards the page length of the proposal?
Sure. So we do allow for some like short appendices, but I would be careful to not like, you can have like a table or a chart or something, or sometimes like a research protocol or something like that, but I would really limit it to like a page or so. You don't want it to be going much any longer than that. I don't know if I mentioned at some point during this presentation that references don't count against the page limit though. So the 4-page limit for an LOI is 4 pages of content, and then you can have references after that.
This is another question. It says, if you have competing hypotheses, does the pilot data matter less?
Oh, yeah, I guess that's fun. So I think we would still want to see the pilot data, but yeah, again, sort of show us what you're thinking about this. Like, so if you have these pilot data that are leading you to have these competing hypotheses, what are you thinking? Why are you thinking this? What does that mean for you? And how is it leading you to these research questions that you're posing? Sort of like that, like sort of walk us. I think a good thing to think about that is to, like, you walk us through your thinking about it, and that will help us see how we want to evaluate it. Yeah, that's an interesting one.
I'll just mention we have just a few more minutes remaining. So if anyone has any other questions, now would be the time to post them. And I think this, can't tell because it says anonymous attendee if it's the same person, but sort of asked in terms of presenting the pilot, do you just want general takeaways or actual results presented? And then they're just saying obviously because of the space limit.
Sure. Yeah, and this is, I mean, this is the struggle with proposal writing is like what should you prioritize and things like that. Pilot findings can be presented in a number of ways. They can just be presented in like a simple conclusion. It sort of depends. Like some pilot work is large and has, like, we would have tables or something like that. Others you can just sort of present the conclusion. Here's what we did a pilot and here's what we learned, or something like that. I think both of those are acceptable. It's sort of like, but the level of detail that you go into on the pilot is still beneficial because it sort of shows that, like, all of that pre-work that you've done. I don't think it's a bad thing to go into your pilot data a lot, but be careful if it comes at the expense of other things. But that's sort of that's a really hard line for you to figure out, and that may be like a trial and error thing. Or what I would really recommend is, after you write your proposal, have someone else read it and see how they feel about it. You can have your advisor read it, have a colleague in your department read it, or something like that. And that can be some feedback that you ask for, like, hey, do you think I went into enough detail on this other stuff? It's really helpful if you remember who we are as readers internally, maybe have someone outside of your subfield read it or something like that. Like, so in like a more general, a person who understands social science methods and knows the field broadly, but maybe not the specific subfield you're in. And they can give you some feedback about the construction of your proposal, because your first hurdle to get over is us internally as program staff as that more general social science literate audience.
Thank you for that. Someone asked if it matters sort of if the ultimate sort of output for their research project will be a book length project or if it would be published as a series of articles. Do you guys?
Yeah. So we don't have a stated preference for that. We ask our reviewers what the contribution will be, but like it's sometimes things turn into books, sometimes things are just articles. In reality, because we are an interdisciplinary funder, we're not expecting everyone to write a book, because not all disciplines are like book disciplines. You won't catch an economist writing a book, because that does not help them get tenure. So it's sort of we're open to both of those. If you are interested in publishing a book, we do have a publications arm, and we will direct you to our publications director if you get funding, and she will talk about that whole process. And she's it's always very encouraging, and always she's trying to convince everyone to write a book. But again, that's her prior as a publications person.
All right, well, I think that's all the questions, and we are just about time anyway. So I just want to say thank you, Stephen and James, for agreeing to do this. Appreciate it, and I know our members certainly appreciate it. And to everyone, we'll send this recording around as soon as we have it available.
Thanks, Bennett.
Thanks very much.
Mm-hmm.
Take care.
See you.